Hello everyone and welcome to another video. Now last time we compared a GTX 1660 Ti and RTX 3050, we used the 8GB version of the RTX card because the 6GB one didn't exist. Today then we're seeing how 2024's 3050 6GB compares to 2019's 1660 Ti in a handful of games. The 3050 6GB is a 70 watt card that requires no external power. I have the Gigabyte low profile version here, which is ideal for upgrading small form factor office machines. It doesn't just have less memory than its older 8GB counterpart though, it has less cores too. It's a same name different product type situation. The 1660 Ti I'm using is the warm and noisy Dell OEM variant. It has a 120 watt TDP, requires a single 8-pin connector and can usually be purchased for less than the 6GB 3050 on eBay, at least here in the UK at the time of this video, based on the listings I'm seeing at the moment. When we compared the 8GB 3050 to the 1660 Ti in 2023, the RTX card claimed victory, albeit narrowly in some titles. I'd be surprised if the cut down 6GB RTX card could pull ahead today, but let's find out. I'm going to show you gameplay footage from the 1660 Ti and then the 6GB 3050 for each game, followed by the performance figures instead of side by side, as the results should be clearer. First of all then, let's briefly talk about ray tracing. The 1660 Ti can handle it here. It's easy to forget that this GTX card can utilise RT, well sort of. Performance is pretty bad as you might have expected, and unlike the 3050 6GB, we can't use DLSS to try and boost the frame rate figures. We can utilise FSR though, which we will be doing later, but I'll only be using native AA mode for today's benchmarks. It's probably not worth enabling RT on the 3050 6GB either, unless you don't mind using a pretty aggressive form of upscaling, at least here in Cyberpunk. At native 1080p with RT Ultra, it wasn't really worth benchmarking. It's a card that supports ray tracing, but it's a card that you'd probably not want to use it with. So we'll start with CS2 here. First of all, we have the 1660 Ti gameplay. I'm using the high settings with 4x MSAA by default, and as you can see, it's a pretty decent effort from the 1660 Ti. Performance is good, we're getting at least 200 frames per second. The card is running warm, temperatures are getting pretty high, and it is rather noisy. This is the Dell OEM version, of course, but it's a pretty respectable experience. When we look at the gameplay from the 3050 6GB, it doesn't feel any different, it feels just as smooth to play, but I do believe it is falling ever so slightly behind, as will be revealed in the on-screen figures shortly. The 6GB of VRAM isn't really a problem for either card here. This one runs cooler and quieter than the 1660 Ti, of course. It consumes less power as well. If you look at the power consumption figures, we're hovering around 70 watts. That is the maximum for this pinless or power connectorless GPU. Let's throw up the comparative figures now. Then you can see that the 1660 Ti 6GB does indeed pull ahead, 227 FPS on average, a 1% low of 150 and a 0.1% low of 64, whereas with the 3050 that's hitting 210, the 1% low is slightly better at 158, and the same can be said for the 0.1% low, but overall the average is better with the older card. For Cyberpunk 2077 then, we're using the medium preset with medium crowds. Textures are also set to medium by default. With the 1660 Ti here, we're averaging around 60 frames per second. It's a pretty smooth experience. Once again, we're consuming up to and including 120 watts of power. And the card is running pretty warm, but it's not that much of a problem. The single fan 1660 Ti here will, however, get quite audible, but all in all, for a card that's a good few years old, I think it still provides a respectable and relatively low cost experience. If you're looking for one of these in 2025, this probably isn't the model I'd suggest, but you may be pleasantly surprised in some scenarios. From what I'm seeing here, the 3056 gig is falling slightly below 60 frames per second a lot more often, but it still feels pretty consistent to play here. Again, look at the power consumption and temperature of this card. It's a decent experience. I'm surprised by the result, to be honest, considering the VRAM, not just here but for the 1660 Ti as well. If we throw up those comparative figures then you'll see that once again the 1660 Ti, the older of the two cards, is pulling ahead. We're looking at 60 frames per second for the GTX card compared to 55 frames per second for the budget RTX card. The percentile lows, however, were pretty similar, and both are going to deliver a fairly consistent experience. GTA 5 Enhanced, of course, will not work with the RT presets with the 1660 Ti. We could enable it with Cyberpunk, but that's not the case here. Because of that, I'd probably suggest just playing with the older legacy or original version of the game. That said, we're getting over 100 frames per second with the 6GB 1660 Ti here. Again, feels pretty consistent to play, and I still think it looks pretty decent as well. If we move on to the 3050 6GB gameplay, the same can be said really. I can certainly feel that it's running a little worse, sub 100 FPS basically all of the time here, but we are still seeing plus 60. This is with the high preset and FSR3 on, but set to native AA as I mentioned before. I've tried to stick with the native resolution throughout here. I've just used FSR anti-aliasing because it looks a lot better, a lot sharper than the TAA solution that this game offers. If we put some comparative figures up on screen once again, then you'll see that the 1660 Ti pulls ahead by quite some margin, 103 FPS with a 1% low of 89 and a 0.1% low of 62 compared to 86, 75 and 70. Both are going to provide you with solid gameplay results. That said, the 1660 Ti is a little better. In Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 with the 1660 Ti, we are hitting at least 60 frames per second with the medium preset. I've also used SMAA2TX. You go any higher than this, so you use high, and you're going to see dips below 60 frames per second, at least without any upscaling enabled. But I think this is a pretty respectable result. The game still looks really good at medium, and it runs really nicely. We'll switch to the 3050 6GB gameplay, and again it falls slightly behind that of the 1660 Ti here. We're looking at around about 50 to 55 FPS most of the time, but again feels pretty consistent to play, as you can see by that on-screen frame time graph. Now if we put the comparative results up, you'll see that the 3050 6GB hitting 54 overall, 1% low at 47, a 0.1% low at 46, so like I said, very consistent here. But the 1660 Ti, which is a 6GB card and only a 6GB card, pulls ahead with 62 FPS with a 1% low of 54 and a 0.1% low of 53. So better across the board this time around, but again, not too many complaints from me from either card here. It's the turn of the dreaded Oblivion Remaster now. As much as I love Oblivion, I think it's fair to say that with older cards, this runs pretty poorly. Not just older cards actually, it doesn't run all that well. Anyway, as you can see here with the 1660 Ti, not really good news. It's 38 FPS overall, although it doesn't look like it from the recorded footage here. We're getting less than 40 basically all of the time, and this is with the low preset. FSR3 is once again enabled but set to native AA. I don't have the Lumen Be Gone mod enabled here, so we still have a Lumen on but set to low by default. But while it may come across as playable in terms of an average, yeah, there are too many stutters here to really enjoy it at native resolution here. It's pretty problematic from what I've seen on this card so far. Not as problematic, however, as it is with the 3050 6GB. That's going to run slightly worse. For the average, we're looking at 33 frames per second. The 1% low is 25 and the 0.1% low is just 8. So there are actually a few more dips and drops with the 3050 6GB in Oblivion Remastered. And when we compare these results to the 1660 Ti that we tested just now, it's a lot less consistent with the RTX GPU. 33, 25 and 8 on the 3050 compared to 38, 26 and 16. So still not brilliant, but a little bit smoother with the older GTX card. Our penultimate game is Red Dead Redemption 2 on the 1660 Ti. It's looking pretty good at the medium settings. Well, we have the ultra textures enabled because everything else, in my opinion, just looks like mud. Everything else is set to medium, and TAA is also set to medium with the sharpness turned up quite a bit. This gave us a pretty decent average, almost 90 FPS here. There will be some dips towards the low 60s, but all in all, I think it's a really good experience, and you're getting a lovely combination of performance and visuals here with these settings. When we switch to the 6GB RTX 3050, then again plus 60 frames per second, and the consistency of the game was pretty respectable as well. Not too many dips and drops, although we did see 1 or 2 frame dips below 60 FPS, but that was only in and around Valentine. When we compare this to the performance of the 1660 Ti, then again the 3050 6GB 2024's card, power connectorless card, runs a little worse. A good few frames per second worse, like 14, 15 FPS worse, and the percentile lows were also lower as well. Let's finalise with the Witcher 3 next gen version at Ultra here, with screen space reflection set to low because it absolutely decimates our performance when we turn things up. Now with the 1660 Ti we're getting a lovely 82 FPS, a 1% low of 64 and a 0.1% low of 59. So all in all, this is pretty respectable performance even in and around the busier city areas. Busier city areas. What am I talking about? For the 3050 6GB then, we're looking at a drop to 68 frames per second. So still pretty good, still plus 60 FPS, not bad for a 6GB cut down 3050. The percentile lows do leave a little to be desired here, 54 and 37, so they're not awful, but it's a lot less consistent with this card. If we put the comparative results up on screen, then again it's a victory for the 1660 Ti 6GB, which pulls ahead by a good few frames here, not just in terms of the average, but also in terms of the percentile numbers as well. The 1660 Ti, for those percentile numbers, hit 64 and 59 compared to 54 and 37. So the 3050 6GB has a few more problems. But there we are. The 1660 Ti 6GB versus the 3050 6GB in 2025. If you're looking for something that doesn't consume much power, the 3050 6GB is okay, but if you do have a power connector and you're looking for a budget card that can handle itself fairly well, quite surprising in some instances, then a 1660 Ti is still okay, but you might find yourself running out of VRAM pretty quickly in the latest games. But I hope you've enjoyed this comparison. It was certainly fun to make. Thanks for watching as always. Leave your thoughts down below and hopefully I'll see all of you in the next one.